أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. My beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All praise and thanks be unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator, the sustainer, the most merciful, the most kind. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, I bear witness that none has the right to be worshipped except Allah, the most gracious. And we send our greetings and salutations to our beloved Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, our master, our leader, and to his family, his sahaba, and all those of his ummah until the end of time. May we be amongst them. Ameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us in this waqt of Jumu'ah, to forgive us for all the sins that we've done since last week Jumu'ah, and let the week to come be a light, this Jumu'ah be a light for the week to come. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless all those Muslimin and all the people of the world who are going through difficulty and oppression and hardship. May Allah alleviate their struggle, may Allah make easy for them, may Allah grant our Hujjaj a safe journey, and grant them an ibadah that is accepted and a Hajj that is accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ameen. Alhamdulillah, today we conclude on our history of Al-aqsa. And for the past 2 weeks, we're discussing from the time of Nabi Ibrahim, basically about 6,000 years of history, up until the modern time, up until, we could say, the 20th century. And for the longest period of time, of the points we need to highlight, is that while Palestine was shifted between this hand and that hand, different leaders and rulers, for 1,200 years, from the time of Sayyidina Umar until about 1948, for 1,200 years, Palestine, the area of Palestine, and in particular the city of Jerusalem and the Masjid of Al-aqsa, was in the hands of Muslim rulers. And those Muslim rulers came from different places. They were Sahaba initially, they were kings, Umayyad kings, Abbasid kings, they were Shia Fatimid rulers, they were for a long period of time Ottoman, Turkish rulers. And in this 1,200 year period, it is perhaps the best in terms of rights and tolerance for non-Muslims or the minority. That Palestine by and large was always, in the time of the Muslims, a place that was welcoming to every nation and race and religion. This is not my words, but this is the words of historians, and we can see history. Only within a short period of 88 years, when the Crusaders took over, was there massacre and bloodshed and the burning down of churches and masjids. In that 88 years, in the middle of the Muslim rule, was there bloodshed and massacre. And when the Muslims reconquered it through Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, rahimahullah, we continued that policy of tolerance, open to all and freedom for all. And it is because of that, and the fact that Muslim lands were a place of safety and security for many oppressed people, that we have the situation we have today. How is it now? Most of us, we grew up, since we were born, we know that there's problems in Palestine, and we know it to be ruled by the Israeli, Jewish, Zionist occupation. We all grew up knowing that. But this is not the norm. Understand that for the last 1,300 years, 88 years was under the Crusaders, and about 80 years now under Israeli rule. For the rest of that 1,200 years, it has been Islamic rule, Muslim rule. So we live in a very unique time, and a very shameful time in our history. We must admit this, that it is on our watch that this is happening. And our forefathers and our generations before us did not have that. So how did we lose Palestine a second time? We lost it to the Crusaders the first time and we took it back. How did we lose it now a second time, and why do we live in this period? 1917, so it's 100 years ago, right? 19 was basically exactly 100 years ago. The world was going through the First World War. The world was fighting with itself, and the Muslim caliphate was still in existence. There was still a Khalifa, a very weak Khalifa, but there was someone who was kind of responsible for the Muslims. And that caliphate, that leader, that Khalifa was in Istanbul, in the Ottoman Turkish Empire. There was a Turkish Empire, and all the Muslim lands basically were attached to the Ottoman Turkish Empire. The Middle Eastern Muslim countries, Egypt, North Africa, and Turkey, they were under the Ottoman leadership. And just something to think about. We know that the Ottomans declined in power from the day when they were very strong and they invaded Europe, and they were the most powerful nation on earth to 100 years ago. We were on the verge of collapse in Turkey. But just something to think about. that when Muslims developed here in South Africa, in Cape Town, and the British ruled us here, the Ottomans never ruled South Africa and never ruled the Muslims here in South Africa. But when there was a Muslim population here and the British ruled us, and they found a Muslim people here, they contacted the Ottomans and said, look, you have Muslim people here, and we need you to send someone to guide them. And the Ottomans took it upon themselves that even though we don't rule this place, South Africa, so far away from Turkey, we will send an Imam, Abu Bakr Effendi, rahimullah. There's things to say, good and bad, whatever. But they sent a man who they felt, look, there's a Muslim community in the end of Africa, we send an Imam to guide them. Because it's our responsibility of the Ummah. Now this kind of leadership is lacking. And say what you want of the Ottomans or the Khalifa, but this kind of thing is lacking in our Ummah and time. So the Ottomans, 1917, they were on the losing side of World War I. They lost. And when they lost, the winners, America, France, America, France, the UK, Britain, they broke up the Ottoman Empire. And amongst the lands that were lost from the Ottomans was Palestine. And it came under British colonized rule. So the British took control of Palestine and they were in charge of Palestine, as the French were in charge of Syria and different lands. And we know that if you look at the Middle East, it's a famous saying, if you look at the Middle East, you'll find the borders of the Middle East in straight lines. Usually borders are like rivers or mountains. On this side of the mountain, it's South Africa. On this side of the river is Zimbabwe. Right? Natural boundaries. But the Middle East, you find straight lines. Why? Because someone, the British, they sat in an office. They said, look, let's take the Middle East. We draw lines. This is your part. That's my part. They draw lines. Today, this part of the road is Jordan. That part of the road is Palestine. Tomorrow you woke up, you're in a new country. Countries like Kurdistan, the Kurds, you always hear the Kurds, who are they? There was a country called Kurdistan, millions of people. The next day they woke up, the country doesn't exist anymore. They gave one part to Syria, one part to Iraq, one part to Turkey. No more country. Today you are now Syrian, you are Turkish. Your country disappeared overnight. This is what they did. And it was deliberate. What do you think is going to happen if you do this to a nation? So Palestine came under the control of the British. And leading up to this, about 50 years before that, and if you look at the population statistics of Palestine, there was a tiny, negligible Jewish community. The 99% or more, 90% or more, was Muslim Arabs living in Palestine. And there was a sizable Christian community. But there was not really a big Jewish community. Jews living in Palestine was not very common. They didn't really live in Palestine. But as Europe, and obviously it became to a climax during the World War II, the Europeans were always, they were oppressive to the Jews. Jews found it very difficult living in European or Christian Europe. And they were expelled many times from this land to that land. When Spain was conquered, we said, when the Muslims were pushed out of Spain, along with the Muslims, the Jews were thrown out as well. A big Jewish population who lived and thrived and prospered in Spain, they had to leave Europe. And they found the Muslim land safe. Morocco was a place, and until today there's Jews in Morocco. Many European Jews left, and they lived in our lands. Since the beginning of our time as this ummah, Allah has blessed the Ahlul Kitab, given them special rights, given all non-Muslims, but in particular the Ahlul Kitab. We know this from the Quran. So many times, Ya Ahlul Kitab, Ya Ahlul Kitab. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says so many times, Ya Ahlul Kitab, ta'alaw ila kalamatin sawa'in baynana wa baynakum. Let us come to a common agreement, O Ahlul Kitab. This is the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we know from our history how we've treated Ahlul Kitab and all minorities, not only Jews and Christians. So they found in the Muslim lands a place of security. And when things in Europe became difficult for Jews, there was a movement, and this is the word, the Zionist movement. It's a relatively new group. It's not part of Jewish religion, but it's a political group. They said, we should all, our Jews living across the world, we should all get together and have a Jewish homeland. That for so long, there was no country for Jews. Let us have a nation where all the Jews can come together and we can live freely. Because we're being oppressed in Germany, we're being oppressed in Britain, we're being oppressed here and there. Let's live under our own rule. They've always been a minority and a people that's been oppressed. Never for so long, since the time of Nabi Sulaiman, the Jews have never really had a country of their own. So this was the idea. And they decided, let's make Palestine our country of choice. And through political pressure, through being well connected, through financial means. You know, there's a famous saying that the Zionists, when Palestine was under the rule of the Ottomans, they came basically with a blank check to the Ottoman Khalifa and said, sell us Palestine, we'll buy it from you. The Khalifa obviously said, no. How can I sell what's not mine to sell? As bad as the Khalifas were, and they drank and they did whatever they want, there was that level of izzah. We can't do this. We won't sell that. So the Muslims constantly said, you're welcome to live here, and your rights will be protected. When they were being persecuted, you can come and live in our lands. But they wanted a step more. So when the British took over Palestine, they found a gap. They said, eventually the British are going to leave. Britain is just keeping watch and control, and then they're going to leave Palestine. And they made sure that by the time the British left, that they were in a position to take over. So they started sending hundreds of thousands of Jews from Europe and all over the world to Palestine as refugees. Now, as I said again, if you look at statistics, at World War I, there was less than maybe 5% of the population were Jewish. 20 years later, World War II, that number jumped to 30% of the population. These were refugees coming in. And then when the Holocaust came, when Hitler basically started massacring the Jews, more and more of them started coming into Palestine as refugees. And I must pause on the Holocaust here. We as Muslims should never don't ever say, the Holocaust didn't exist, or what happened was a good thing. Haram for you to say something like that. We don't approve of massacring of women and children. We don't do that. We don't believe in that. We don't follow the example of those who did haram. When Nabi ﷺ entered Makkah, even though they abused and killed the Sahaba, did he go in and say, now we do to you what they did to us? No. If they rape and harm our women, we don't go in and rape your women. That's not our deen. We don't take our deen from you. We take our deen from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba. So when one act of oppression and injustice occurred, or as Hitler did, we are against these kind of things. And we say this is haram. And we will never ever approve of that. So, because of the Holocaust, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jews entered Palestine. And as the British were about to leave, so after about 10 years of 20, 30 years of keeping control of Palestine, the British decided we're going to pull out and we leave it to you to decide what you want. You Palestinians and you Israelis can decide what you want. They drafted an agreement, this for history's sake. Just before the British moved out, they suggested, let's make two countries. We will have an Israeli country, we will have a Palestinian country, and we'll have Jerusalem controlled by, like the United Nations. It won't belong to anybody. Now, 20 years ago, there was no Israel. People have come as refugees, and they've come against our will, and they've taken over land, they've taken the resources, and now you're forcing us to accept that we need to give half the country away. The Muslims, of course, rejected the agreement. And the Muslim countries around, the neighbors of the neighboring Arab countries, rejected the agreement. So when the British pulled out, and obviously the Israelis were funded and supplied with weapons from Europe, they basically took over Palestine and they drove out the Muslims who were living there. And that's how the Israeli state was formed. Within 50 years from not having a Jewish population, the state just took over. Similar to what our fathers know in apartheid, a group of people came and just said, all of you will move out of this land. It's now for us. Exactly the same. Exactly the same. And as the Israeli state began to develop, the Muslim armies of Jordan and Syria and Egypt intervened, but they were beaten. And this is the sad reality. A tiny population in the lands of Islam, we are unable to defend ourselves. This is our own shortcomings and weakness. And luckily, the only saving grace was a small portion, East Jerusalem, what we call the West Bank, or East Palestine. The Jordan army was able to keep it secure. They were able to keep that part of Jerusalem in the hands of the Muslims. And that's where basically Israel said, we'll stop. That you guys keep the West Bank and we'll keep the rest. A tiny population. And you can see, if you look at those maps, you'll see the green is what was Palestine when the Jews came as refugees, to what is Palestine today. And that's not, it became smaller and smaller. And that tiny, in the next slide or two, you'd find that is what remains of what is under Muslim Palestinian control. And the population of the Palestinians were pushed out. And today it's the longest, in the history of today, it's the longest occupied territory in the world. Even the international community, even America, even Britain, will say the land that Israel has taken is illegally held. That this is land that doesn't belong to them. That the original agreement said they should only have a certain area, but they've even gone beyond that land. This is United Nations, European, American legislation has all said this is illegal settlements. But no one has brought them to task. So this continued. And the Muslim neighbors and lands, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Egypt, all of them stood by. They sent big words, but not really couldn't do anything. And this is the failure of the Muslim Ummah and community at large, that this fell into the hands of an outside enemy. The masjid, and if you want to understand what's happening to Masjid Al-Aqsa, so who looks in control? Masjid Al-Aqsa falls within that West Bank territory. And on paper, it still belongs basically, or is still under the custodianship of Jordan. So the country of Jordan, they were able to, we said, secure. They were able to stop the Israelis from taking over all of Jerusalem. They managed to keep East Jerusalem. And the masjid was agreed that they would be controlled by Jordan. In the 1960s, another war broke out, and Israel even conquered the West Bank. And they took control of the masjid. But they gave back the masjid when they saw maybe now the Muslims are waking up. They gave the masjid back to Jordan, but they maintained control of the West Bank. So even that little bit that was left continued to fall in the hands of Israel. And our Palestinian brothers and sisters, and this is not a Muslim thing. You know, this is Christians are also involved in this. This is a human thing. Anyone that is unbiased and you look at this and you study it, that this is unfair, this is unjust. That the only reason why no one is standing up in the international community is because of power and money. That everyone knows, Muslim or non-Muslim, that this is unjust, that this is really apartheid exactly as it was in South Africa, if not worse. And it's continued much longer. That land and homes were taken unjustifiably. A population was pushed out of their nation, their country, and a new foreign group was occupying it illegally. And what caused this tension was Israel allowed the Muslims to maintain and manage the Al-Aqsa complex, the masjid in this area. You can basically, inside it's on paper under your control. But each year you'd find they encroach further and further. And this is the methodology of the past 100 years. We'll walk into a neighborhood and slowly take over, bit by bit, bit by bit, bit by bit. We'll do it within time. Maybe not one thing overnight, but we'll take over, we'll send more and more people. Settlers will go into an area. They'll say, this area, Bukab, is fine, a Muslim area. But then they will send a few families in, take over the street, and then the next street. And then as time goes on, slowly and further, these people are pushed out. And these are people who had homes, are now living. People are born and die in refugee tents. SubhanAllah. People were pushed out. They lived their whole lives in the middle of the desert in Jordan, a refugee place. This is how it's been. And as an ummah of 1.5 billion people, this is a failure. We have this thing called fard kifaya. A fard on all of us. If a person dies, and no one performs janazah salah on that person, all of us are sinful. And this is one of those fard kifayas where all of us to a degree are sinful because all of us allowing this on our time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us. And there's more and more of this history. I won't give you further details as you can see the aggression and the push continues further and further. More settlements are being developed further into Palestine, further into Jordan, further into Syria. And what's happening all over the world in the Middle East, you find every Muslim country in the Middle East is at war with itself. Lebanon, civil war. Syria, civil war. Iraq, civil war. Yemen, war. Saudi Arabia and Iran. These things, yet the one place that's the aggressor, no Muslims are fighting that area. No Muslims are defending the oppressed. As something to think about as an ummah, what's happening. And we also need to understand how a tiny group like this developed. It's something for us to learn. Look at what the Israelis did. They said, this land is open to every Jew of the world. It doesn't matter if you have wealth, whatever you are, you come here, we'll give you a home, we'll give you a place, we'll look after you. And you commit yourself to this. Now this is what Muslims should be doing. We look at the Muslims from Burma, they're thrown out, they come with their ships because they're going to be killed in Burma. They come to Malaysia. Malaysia says, no, go back to your country. We don't want to see you. Bangladesh throws you out. Indonesia throws you out. Look at the opposite, subhanallah. This is totally against our religion. And that's why we are where we are. Because this is a people who follow the methodology basically of the Prophet ﷺ in terms of how they deal with one another. They're also we know Israel is one of the countries in the world with the strongest education system. 50% of its people have tertiary level education. 50%. It's one of the highest in the world. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us these guidelines. Read, work together, work as a community, support one another, stand together. Doesn't mean the Israelis are all one and the same. They fight and they argue internally. They have this group, you have your Tablighi Israelis, you have your Salafi Israelis, you've got your Deoband, all different types of Jews. Yet when it comes to standing together, they stand together side by side because we are still Israeli or Jewish. Muslims, we don't do that. That's one of our reasons of failure. And Allah has taught us from the Crusades, from the beginning of our history, if we fix our issues internally, then the external we shouldn't worry about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will fix things externally. Allah is showing us we've got the numbers, we've got the countries, we've got the land, we even have the wealth. So much of the world's wealth is under our control, yet we can't do anything with it. Why? As Sayyidina Umar said, that the thing that makes us special is our deen. When we keep to it, we'll rise up. And when we let go, it will fall apart. If we look to the future, this issue of Palestine is a significant thing in the terms of hadith and in terms of qiyamah. And something quite scary, or something quite interesting to think about. The Muslims were always told by the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the Sahaba were told by the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, close to the end of time, a lot of fighting will occur in the Middle East and in particular in Palestine. Now this was before Makkah was even a Muslim country. And the Jews were not a people who even lived in Palestine. If you remember a few weeks ago, I said that at the time of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, there were no Jews living in Palestine. Why? Because the Romans forbid them from living there. There was no Jews living there. And the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, the problems close to Qiyamah will not be between the Muslims and the Romans, or the Muslims and the Persians were the big enemy at the time. No, there will become conflict between Muslims and the Jews of Palestine. And this is where a lot of the problems are going to occur that's going to lead up to Qiyamah. And we live in a time, subhanAllah, I'm not a fatalistic person. I don't want us to everyone think Qiyamah is tomorrow. But it is interesting that we see these hadith coming to life in our time. The Jews returning to Palestine is something unique. Didn't occur ever before in the history of this ummah. In fact, in the history of the world, the Jews coming back to Palestine like this didn't occur since the time of Nabi Sulaiman. And the fact that there will be conflict between the Muslims and the Jews in Palestine is also something that is mentioned close to Qiyamah. And if you look deeper into the hadith, the Prophet also says before the conflict in Palestine, or the major conflicts in Palestine, there will be war in Iraq, and there will be a war in Syria. Now these lands were not Muslim lands in the time of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They were not Muslim lands, but the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says in Iraq and in Syria in particular. And that's why, if we look at the hadith, Nabi Isa and Imam Mahdi will appear in Syria. There will be major conflict in Syria, and the problems will occur in Syria mainly. And in fact, the fight with Dajjal would be in Syria. And then after Dajjal is defeated, will Palestine be liberated? So, subhanAllah, it's not also to say we sit on our hands and say we need to wait for Nabi Isa to liberate Palestine. That doesn't work like that. But we need to also realize that we're living in a very strange time. For the first time in 1,500 years, we don't have a Khalifa. For the first time in so long, have we lost Masjid Al-aqsa. For the first time are we seeing this kind of fighting and violence in Iraq and Syria, and things are leading up to that point. So, what does this mean for us, Jamaatul Muslimin? What does this mean for us? It means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not expect from you and me to conquer Palestine or to liberate Masjid Al-Aqsa. But what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does need from yourself and myself is to do our little part in the ummah. to do our little part. We cannot maybe fix the problems in Palestine today, but we can fix the issues in the masjid on the corner. We can't control what Saudi Arabia does or what Syria does, but we as a community can control what's happening in Cape Town. We can work with our ulama and our masjid committees and our leaders and our imams. And we can say, look, we have our problems and our differences, okay. And we can argue about it, okay. But when it comes to our community, we stand together. We can help that Muslim refugee that comes from Somalia or Bangladesh and say, come in, I'll do my part. That's something we can do. And those little principles that we hope, as I said, we hope that our leaders, our Muslim governments will do that. But if we're not doing it, we shouldn't point the finger. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will change the situation of a people when they change themselves. And this is our step, our time. So we shouldn't be surprised if we see these major occurrences in our lifetimes, and we need to prepare for it. And at the very least, what we should do is make dua. We should be making dua continuously for our brothers and sisters in Palestine, in Burma, in Yemen, in Somalia, and the list continues. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala assist the Muslimin and all the oppressed people on earth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises, Al-aqibatu li-muttaqeen. In the end, the muttaqeen will come out victorious. In the end, the people of righteousness will be victorious. When and how and what, that is in Allah's hands. The timetable belongs to Allah. The timetable belongs to Allah, but the outcome is there. Allah says in the Quran that He tested a people so much that even the Nabi, not our Nabi, but a Nabi, said, Mata Nasrullah? When is Allah's help going to come? Ya Allah, when are you going to help us? A Nabi of the Anbiya of Allah. And Allah says, Ala inna Nasrullahi qareeb. Don't worry, the assistance of Allah is always close. It's going to come. You just do your part. And that's what we need to do. We can talk about global politics till we blue in the face. And it's interesting to know and learn. We should know what's happening. But what accounts is outside that masjid. When we go outside into the world again, how do we do our business? How do we treat our neighbors? How do we treat our colleagues? How do we, as Muslimin, live our life? And if we can't practice that on a small scale, the ummah will not be fixed on a big scale. Every Nabi began from the bottom, from Bilal the slave, and then eventually we got to being the Khalifa. It doesn't happen overnight. We don't start from the top down, it's a bottom up. And we're an ummah built like brick upon brick. Each of us is a brick. And if each of us play our role, alhamdulillah, that will be safe and secure. So we have a responsibility first and foremost here in our country and fix our problems. And we hope other Muslim communities will follow. And remember, leadership. Don't look at the Arabs for leadership. Or even the ulama for leadership. Don't expect that it's the responsibility of Saudi Arabia or the Egyptians or whoever they are. Salahuddin wasn't an Arab. And if every person has that idea, well, it's a problem, what's the ulama doing? What's the MJC doing? What's the imam doing? What's the king doing? Nothing gets fixed. Our system, and we can learn from the Yahud in this, what am I doing? I need to fix my own situation. We as a people need to fix it individually. That's the message we need to learn. And I end off with this quote that we say, something that we can all rally behind, our departed Nelson Mandela. He said, we know too well that our freedom, and us, for South Africans, we should understand this the best, that our freedom, our position as a country, is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. That we, people who felt oppression, should know firsthand that we stand against oppression. That when we spoke about the story of Fir'aun and Nabi Musa, we talk about the story of Nabi Dawood and Goliath. There will always be tyrants and there will always be oppressed. And as Muslimin, we are always on the side of the oppressed. If the oppressor is a Muslim, we are against him. Nabi Sallallahu says that we help the oppressor and the oppressed. So the Sahaba said, how do you help? We understand you help the oppressed. How do you help the oppressor? So he said, by stopping him. That's how you help the oppressor. Our duty and as an ummah is not just about our salah. We are people of justice. And we are against oppression in whichever form it takes. But so much more if that oppression is against us and our women and our children. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant that we live to see a better time in our ummah. May we not be the ummah that loses, well, we've lost it, but let us not be the ummah that finally lets go. May we not be the one in our generation, may that sin not be on us, that we were the ones that after all these centuries of a golden age of Islam, that we let it go in our time, that we couldn't get our act together. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us. Alhamdulillah, we live in a time also, and I want to conclude with this. We live in a time where we never had so many, resources, expertise. In this masjid alone, the Sahaba were 300 people and they changed the world. This masjid is about 150, 200 people. But you'll find doctors and lawyers and engineers. The kind of intellect, the kind of resources we have at our disposal today is more than any other ummah before. More than our grandparents, more than the people that built this masjid. But what masjids have we built? What organizations have we developed? What schools have we built? What have we left as a legacy? That's what each and every one of us need to ask. Our forefathers did it with a lot less. But our potential is so much. There's so much potential in this ummah. And we hope, inshaAllah, for a cause like Palestine, or not even for any cause, for the deen, for our own sake, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant that we all collectively wake up, and it begins with us, myself and you, individually. May Allah bless us. Ameen. We just have a few announcements. Once again, a reminder that our brother Abdul Mu'min Basir and his wife, Brother Abdul Mu'min is the man in the office that sees to the slide. So if next week there's some technical issues, we know why, because he's not going to be here next week, because he'll be in Mecca. We'll ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless him and his wife with a Hajj Maqbool and Mabrur, a safe journey and a safe return. And as well, our brother Wasif Ali and his wife Nihal, they will also be leaving on the 9th of August on Hajj, and all the Hujjaj, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them a safe trip and a blessed Hajj. Ameen. Anyone would like to contact me, westmuhammad@gmail.com, or you can visit our Burhanul website. All these lectures, inshallah, are online. If you'd like to download it or copy it to learn some more, the slides are there and the lectures are there, burhanul.org.za. Please log on. And inshallah, I don't know if the Qurban slide is on, that I think around the 1st of September will be the Eid al-Adha. And Burhanul, inshallah, if you'd like to slaughter a Qurban as part of the Hajj rituals and part of the Qurban procedure, you can contact Buta Talib. You could contact Buta Ihsan as well at the back. Myself as well, if you'd like to Qurban for yourself, or Aqiqah for your newborn son or daughter, and just a Sadaqatul Jariyah, Sadaqah for the Ummah, please contact us, and the price is on there. I think it's 1950 for a sheep. And inshallah, join us as well on the day of Eid al-Adha. Ameen. Wa sallallahu sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam mursaleen. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.